so peaceful it was. And there was boys 18, young lieutenants 21, 2, and with the markers on, all the graves marked, and they were all the World War II veterans. So sad, though, it'd been so long, and they just began to live and died, had to die. And there was still a breastworks up on a hill that they left there on the war. Oh, it was bad for the South, and the South hated the North, and the North. I don't think the North had the hard feelings to the South like the South did to the North, and most all the old people hated the North. But my grandfather, on Papa's side, my grandfather Jarbo was in the Second World War, and he got a mini ball in his leg, and he would be laid up every winter for several months. When he get cold weather, must have had arthritis in it awful bad.
Was he in the Union Army or Confederate?
He was on the Union side.
Union?
He went from Kansas, and he was on crutches when we met him. He was on crutches, but he had a big garden. He'd go down steps from his house, steep-like steps from his house, and he would. Did I do something to it?
No.
And he would sit down and spade up that garden, or stand on the part of his crutch and spade up that garden and plant it. He had a beautiful garden and beautiful flowers. Of course, everything grows easily there. And he was a pretty old man. He had, like Roy's father, he had a white beard and white hair, and he loved we'd crawl in bed with him, my brother and I, to hear him tell, and the little brother, to hear him tell about his war days, and things that he did when he was a kid.
You remember any stories he told you?
Huh?
Do you remember any stories he told you?
I remember him telling about getting hit by this. It's a cannonball or something, a mini ball, I believe he called it. What is it?
A mini ball.
I don't know just what a mini ball is. And he told about them marching, and what they didn't have good food, and he saw quite a bit of action. And I didn't ask a lot of things, I was 10 years old, and I never paid too much attention. I just loved to hear him tell about things, about his living in Oklahoma, and so let's see if I can think of anything else that's quite interesting. Three of Roy's cousins, my Daddy Rooker's oldest, and one of his brother Bill had a hotel in Calhoun, and they it's called the Rooker Hotel, and it may still be there. It was there when we went, and they. Of course, they have died. They've all three, or they
left the name there because it's been part of that old hotel was built before the Civil War.
Oh, for goodness sake.
The last one they had never any. Well, one of them did marry and divorced. There was 4 of the children at first, and Maud divorced her husband, and they just lived together. The girls did, and the boy too. And the boy had was crippled up with, he had polio, didn't he, Roy? And so they never married, and so everything fell heir to Tilly. And Tilly lived to be way up in her 90s, and when she died, there was nobody to leave it to but charity, and she left it to some religious charity, and she was well-to-do. And said she was a beautiful girl when she was young.
Is this in Georgia?
She was the
Calhoun,
girls
Georgia,
had boyfriends that died in the war, and then they never married again. Mother Rooker had 2 or 3 sisters that boyfriends were killed in the war, and they never married. Boys that they were engaged to.
Well, my dad didn't marry till he was 40 in his 40s nearly.
he was about 40, and she was 29 when they
raised
married.
8 kids.
And he courted her for 11 years before he married her. And she met him when she was 16, and there never was anybody else for her then but Lee. And she didn't have any. He went to South Carolina and stayed for 3 years. Never even saw her during some of those years, and he fell in love with another girl, and she died of quick consumption.
Oh, my.
And her name was Vicky, and when we lived with him, he still talked about Vicky, and he really cared for her. But he came back and married Mother Rooker, and then they had 5 little boys in 7 years, and then they had a little girl, and then came to Oklahoma and had another little boy. After they came to Oklahoma.
How long did you live in Shawnee?
You mean in all, or while we was down there?
Yeah.
We lived 6 years there, and then sold to my uncle, and we moved to New Orleans and stayed a year, and then went to California.
How big was Shawnee?
A lot.
How big was Shawnee when you moved there?
Oh, it was a lot different than it is now, but I think that it was paved. The main street was paved, and it had a theater. It had a theater that was called the Majestic, and one called the.
She used to be on the stage when she was little.
Mama got us in. I could sing, and I was a pretty little girl. I had curls, and so they had amateur night at the theater, and Mama got acquainted with some theatrical people. And my mother should have been an actress, and in fact, a lady wanted to put her on the stage, and my grandmother said, "No, sir, she wouldn't have her on the stage for anything. She just thought it'd be the ruination of her completely." But she could mimic anybody and anything, and she just had a lot of talent, but she tried to give us a lot of talent too, and help us. And she loved to get the little neighbor kids and put on little fancy dresses and dress them up and put on little shows in the house, with the kids. And if they were double jointed and could perform that way, that was fine, She'd dress them up. And anyway, she went to got acquainted with these theatrical people that lived there on Bell Street in Shawnee. And I remember they had a little girl just my age, little Dorothy Sidoris. Their names were Sidoris, and so they got us both up in a little skit. And I was a little boy, and I wore a white flannel suit and a white felt hat and long pantsuit. And she was dressed in a little fussy dress. She was a real cute little girl, and we sang "Carrie, Mary, Harry." And we got 3rd prize that night. And Mama decided that she'd just get my little brother up with me, and we would put it on, and we did. She fixed up a little skit for us. And sometimes Paul would be blackface, and I would be blackface, and we sang little colored songs, And maybe I was padded up and was real fat, girl. And we got 1st prize every time from then on. And if we got 1st prize 5 nights, we'd go to the city and at the Lyric, I believe, up there, the city. And then you get $5 if you got 1st prize up there. So we got 1st prize up there. And so then when we kept on with that, for quite a long time. And when we moved to California and San Diego, Mama went to no, it was a Pantages theater in Oklahoma City called the Pantages. And in San Diego, it was a Marguerite theater, and the management put out pictures, and we put on little skits. It was vaudeville, and we were in vaudeville then. It wasn't the amateur night. And the Sailor Boys and that was stationed there would throw money up on the stage so we'd get paid for it. And I think about $10 or $15 is what we get paid, but we'd get quite a bit of money that was thrown up on the stage. And we stayed there several months and played there regular. And then when we went to went to Northern California up at Arcata and located there, well then we played in Eureka and we played in Arcata and we played in Blue Lake and several places there.
What kind of skit did you have?
Huh?
What kind of skit did you
Well,
have?
they were song and dance. We danced and we sang.
And this was you and your brother?
And I sang solos. We'd have maybe several little, And I remember one little skit we had that had that, it was all songs nearly. Why, I was Toodles and my brother was going swimming and I didn't want him to go. Well, he went anyway. And so I stole his clothes while he's gone, all of his clothes. And so he come out in a little barrel, tag, and sang this song about him not having any clothes, And then we sang another little skit we had was we sang the Boogeyman Rag, and we dressed in blue, kind of Alice blue clown suits, clown hats. And we danced in it, as we sang.
Boogeyman Rag.
And I sang at everything. After we come back from California, I was 14, almost 14, and we opened the season at the Savoy in Shawnee with our skits. And we sang a matinee Saturday and at night, and then sang Sunday matinee and Sunday night. And a girl that used to be amateur, Pearl Evans, played the piano for us, and she was grown up then, and about 18, I guess, and she was playing the piano for the old Savoy Theater, and that is where what is that theater on? Isn't it on Bell? It is now. I haven't been to the show for years.
The Hornbeck.
Hornbeck, That was
And that's where the
Hornbeck
Savoy was?
And
That's right. That is where the Savoy was.
Huh?
I said, that's right. Now,
Yeah.
now that you say that, I remember. Of course, I'm not old enough to remember the Savoy, but I do remember hearing people talk about it.
Do you remember Shawnee? Did you live in Shawnee?
Yes, I live in Shawnee.
you
I was
did.
born in Shawnee, yes.
Well, you never heard of Pearl Evans, did you?
Um,
She wanted Mama to take me and her and put us on as a sister team, and put us on the circuits. We never did enter a circuit. There was a Pantages circuit and the Orpheum circuit that you could get on, and you would be booked, all over the country.
Do you remember any songs?
Hmm?
Do you remember any songs?
Yes, but I can't sing anymore. I've lost every talent I ever had.
I wanted you to sing Boogeyman Rag for me. I just squawk and squeak. The thing that affected my ears affected my throat too, and I got to where I sang at everything and loved to sing. I go to church and I don't dare open my mouth because I'll squawk and squeak. So yeah, I remember Carrie Mary, the song that I sang with this little girl. I had got a beautiful doll for Christmas. My grandmother gave it to me and dressed it beautifully. Mama did. She made a little dress and all the little underwear and the little gray coat. My mother could sew anything, and a little bonnet for it. And she was so pretty, and Mama said, why don't you take your doll with you? We was going over to Sodoris's. And that little girl ruined my doll. She pulled the little arms loose. It was a kid body, full of sawdust. And I never took it to any other little girl, let her play with it. And I don't have the doll now, but my daughter has the doll. I gave my grandmother gave it to me when I was 7, and I gave it to my daughter when she was 7, and now that it's 70 some odd years old, she still has the doll.
My goodness, and
Chrissy's
she
doll.
still got it. Oh, that's wonderful.
I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
I could tell you an awful lot.
Oh, go
I could
ahead.
tell you an awful lot about my grandmother. You know, she came here. She was born in Michigan, and
What was her name?
her name was Esther Charest. Her father was a full-blooded Frenchman, and I think her mother was French too. And she was a little short, curly-haired woman. And
How do you spell her last name?
it's Sharrey, but it's pronounced Charest. And then there's I think they call her Sherry now, but they pronounced it Charest. And her mother died when she was 3, and her father married again pretty shortly afterwards. And they came to Oklahoma, you know, when it was an Indian territory, real early in Indian territory. And so Grandma went to school at Hartshorn at a Catholic convent. And the Catholic nuns taught her. And she said that they taught her to sew, and they would make the robes for the priest, and they would make them. Some of them was very elaborate, you know, embroidery and everything. And my grandmother could sew beautifully and do all kinds of stitches, and taught me several stitches, blind stitches and things. That was nice. And she said they never taught them book reading. She couldn't read at all when she got out of. She married at 13. She was just barely 13, and she married an old soldier of the World War II.
I
She was
wouldn't be
born
World
in
War II.
1855. My grandmother
it'd been
was.
the Civil War, wouldn't it? Wouldn't been
I mean
World
the Civil War. I mean
Well,
Civil
you said
War.
that
What's the
time
matter?
or two. She said the World War.
And he was 36 years old, and she was just barely 13. And he had a few cattle, and he had just a one little room house that they lived in, and their bed was just a one posted bed. They fastened the bed to the wall, the runners, you know, and on 2 sides. And then they just needed the one post out here. And they had straw tick. And it was just, and I don't know whether they had a mattress over the straw tick or not. And I don't know what they had braced over to hold the tick up. And the first thing, why she had her baby when she was 14. Aunt Mary was just 14 years younger than Grandma. And Grandma said that she wore out her baby clothes playing with 2 little girls that lived 2 miles from her that would come over to play. She was such a child. And this guy was an old soldier, and he was really easygoing, and he wasn't lazy, he didn't work or anything. He almost starved my mother to death, and the day that she went to visit her brother a while before the baby was born, and she took, as dumb as she was, she took scissors and some string, thought the baby might be born on the way. You know, she was so innocent and green that she didn't know anything about, much about having a baby. And she, in case the baby was born, she would know to tie the navel cords, you know. But she said that, of course, the baby wasn't born then. And then later on, why she went to her brothers and sister-in-laws that lived about 6 or 8 miles away from there, and she rode a horseback and went there to stay until the baby was born. And she was 7 miles from a doctor there, but the doctors were pretty bummy in those days. But anyway, he came and was there when she took sick, and they sent him for the doctor. And the doctor didn't come, and the doctor didn't come, and he didn't come back, and Grandma had the baby there without a doctor, but she got along all right. And the next morning, about 8 o'clock, here come Frank, and he was, Frank Hartzell was his name, and he said, they said, what in the world happened? And he said, well, you know, he said, I went sound asleep, and the horse went in the opposite direction, and he found himself miles away from her. And Grandma said that just disgusted her completely with him. But she went back after the baby. Baby was a little girl, and she went back to him and was pregnant again. And she just decided she was going to leave him. She wasn't going to stay with him any longer. And so she was about 6 months pregnant, and she told him, she said, Frank, I'm not going to live with you anymore. She said they were just living on mostly cornbread made with water. And she said that he said, well, what do you want me to do? And she said, I want you to sell your cattle and give me the money out of it. He had some cattle, and of course they didn't get much out of the cattle. And so he did. He gave her the money, and she went to her brother's and stayed and put in for divorce. And she said in those days it was disgraceful to get a divorce. And she said that when, I don't think she got the divorce until after the baby was born, but then she had to go to the county seat to wherever that was. I don't know where that was, at Guthrie. Seemingly they lived down by Wanette. Anyway, somewhere in there. And so she said that when she went to get her divorce, she put on a big hat and a black veil over her face so nobody could see her, you know, because she was ashamed to get a divorce. And so one day she was sitting at her brother's in the doorway with the screen door in front, and was sewing. And she had the baby in a cradle beside of and the little girl was there, of course, too. And she said, but they was real close together, and she said she looked up, and here come Frank on a horse. And he says, Eddie, he called her Eddie. Eddie said, I come to get you. She said, well, I'm not going home with you. And he said, why? She said, just because I told you that I wasn't going to live with you anymore, and I meant it. And so he finally freckled out home. She never saw him again until Aunt Mary was 17 years old, and he came to her door. And she was married to my grandfather then, and he wanted to take Mary home with him and keep house for him, you know. Grandma said over her dead body she would, but he was an old man, she said, with a white beard then. He was pretty old then. And so my grandmother then she married at 17. She married Mr. Darling, and he was a interpreter for the Potawatomi Indians. And he was a French Canadian, and he'd come from Canada.
What was his name?
His name was Louis Darling. D-A-R-L-I-N-G.
Married about 5 times.
And he had married an Indian girl while he was. He lived at the he had a home of his own, but he worked at the Indian Agency, you know, as Potawatomi interpreter. He could talk Potawatomi, but he was a Frenchman. He wasn't he was American. He wasn't an Indian. But when he married this Indian girl, they put him in the tribe, or what is they call it? They adopted him into the tribe. He was a squaw man, you know, then, and so he shared just like a full-blood Indian, and he got everything that the Indians got from the government. So Grandma he was 65 though when she married him. She was 17, and he had a family, quite a big family, but he had a son 18 and a son 14 at home. And when they came, he had a nice home, and he had a nice a team of horses and buggy, and Grandma said when they drove up in the yard after they were married, why, the 14-year-old boy, Indian boy, they showed their Indian a lot, run out and grabbed the baby, and they just had a fit over the little girl and the little boy, and she got along fine with the boys, and she said they were going to school, and her husband was quite educated, Mr. Darling was, and she was ashamed for him to know that she couldn't read, and she would go upstairs and read in the try to help herself to read out of the children's books. And she learned to read, and my grandmother was a good reader, and she never was too good at spelling. She'd write a letter, and she spelled a lot of words by sound, but you could read her letters all right. And so she well read in the Bible before she died. I love to hear grandmother talk the Bible. But this man, she had two little boys by him and was expecting another, and one of the boys, I think the 18-year-old boy, had gone out. Maybe it's a little 14, had become 18. He was about 18. Had got the gun that they hung over the fireplace, and it was a deer gun, and went out and thought he could shoot a deer, but he didn't find the deer. And when he got back, his father said, "Luke, did you?" He said, "Did you shoot that gun off?" And he said, "No." And he said, "Well, I want you to take it out and shoot the shell out, or else, because it's a powerful shell, or dig it out of the gun." And he said, "Okay," but he probably didn't say okay then. They didn't say it, but he said he would. But he didn't do it right then, and then he forgot it. And so the old man had to go to town, and it was quite a long ways to the town where they got supplies. And so he started. One of these children, though, that she had all by herself. He was going to town. Just they had kept thinking the baby was going to be born, and they were running out of groceries, and so there was about 30 miles to the town. And so he told her that it was on the prairie, and he said, "Hang a sheet on the line, and I can see it almost all the way. And if I see the sheet, I'll come right back home." If she got sick, well, she got sick, and after he left, in about dusk, and she had her baby on the front porch on her knees, and the little girl went in and got the scissors and the string, and she tied this baby's navel cord and cut it and everything all by herself, and carried her baby into the bed, and that was terrible.
Well,
but that's the way the pioneer women had those things had to happen.
When he started to take that gun out, didn't he?
Well, yes, and so, but this was a later time when with a second baby. I mean, with a third baby. I don't mean it was with the first baby. I guess that happened because the second baby. No, it was the third baby she was expecting, and I don't know which baby it was now. But anyway, she was about 6 months pregnant with this baby, and he went to town, and he had a renter on the place, and they went in a spring wagon. He went with the renter, and he put the gun in the back of the spring wagon. Your spring wagon it's kind of built out. It's not as big as a big wagon, but it's lighter weight. And so they left early in the morning, and it would take all day to go there, and get back about dark. And it was about dusk when they got back, and it was cold in the wintertime, and he put on had a big heavy overcoat on. And
so they stopped at the renter's house. Grandma said it was quite a little ways from her house. It wasn't right in their yard, and so she said when he got out, he just went out, pulled the gun toward him, and it went off and hit him in the side. And so the renter run down to Grandma's house and told Grandma that he had been shot accidentally and come up there as quick as could be. And Grandma grabbed the youngest little boy, and he grabbed the other little boy, and Mary, little Mary, followed on, and but that little boy that she had by her first husband died when he was three years old with dropsy.
Just a second.
He died.
Just a second.
See here, it says the girl the girl I left behind me.
Isn't it, darling?
Pretty badly dilapidated looking.
What a beautiful, beautiful lady.
Mrs. Rooker, what's your full name?
Mine,
Yes, ma'am.
Cleta Irene Rooker.
Or did it shut off?
Mrs. Rooker, when's your birthday?
Oh, when I was born,
Yes, ma'am.
I was born the 8th of December, 1901,
Where were you born?
in Woodward, Oklahoma.
That's her daughter's.
Who's your father?
My father's name,
Yes, ma'am.
John F. Jarbo,
These two are adopted.
Jarbo.
Jarboe.
Our oldest
Was he from Oklahoma?
He was born in Kansas, in Wellington, Kansas.
I'll show you.
Who was your mother?
My mother was,
Now, this is
my mother's name was Esther Thedora.
This is the youngest one. She's a grandmother. This one.
Esther.
Thedora. T-H-E,
She was
oh, I don't know, Thedora. Thedora, I think.
This is
Smith.
Where was she from?
Well, she was born in St. Joseph, Missouri.
What'd your father do?
Well, he mostly he worked in a shoe store. He was a manager of a shoe store in Woodward when Mother married him.
When did your parents come to Oklahoma?
Daddy came to Oklahoma when his father ran in the run in Oklahoma, and he was, I believe, 11 years old.
So your grandfather made the run of '89?
He made the run of '89.
What was his name?
His name was William Lewis Jarbo, J-A-R-B-O-E, his father's name.
Did he ever talk about the run?
Oh, yes.
What did he say about it?
My
Uncle Tom, brother just older, 2 years older than my daddy, and my daddy's name was John. Did I tell you it's John Jarbo?
Yes, ma'am.
Uh-huh. And they came with their father and made the run, and it was so exciting, you know. They saw wild deer and everything. Kansas was more populated than Oklahoma. It was an Indian territory at that time. And so they just enjoyed the trip, and the excitement of the run was just something, you know. And his older brother ran, but he didn't run with his father. He ran for a claim. He was old enough, I think he was probably 22 or 3 or 4, and he ran for a claim and got over here by New Orleans, his claim. In fact, the place is still there, and he lived on it until he died. But then his wife, the woman that he married, got a claim right across from him, or right beside of his, rather, but of course the road went through afterwards and separated them. And so she sold her place and married Uncle Will afterwards. And he was assessor for a long time in Potawatomi County. And that's how Mother and Dad got together, was through his being assessor. You know, he thought Mama thought she was cute and told Papa was in Woodward, and he said, he had to spend the night. There was a bad storm came up, and he had to spend the night at Grandma and Grandpa Smith's. And so he said, I've got a cute brother I'd like for you to meet, Dora. They called her Dora. And so Daddy, when he came home on a vacation, they lived where they won their land was on Hog Creek. It's called Hog Creek, and it's between here and Oklahoma City, and over close to Pink, Oklahoma.
I know where Pink is.
Uh-huh. And I don't know just where it is, but I have been by there once, and they said that's Hog Creek, and where Grandpa's place was. And Grandpa proved up on it and built a home, and he built a wine cellar, and he put it out to grapes, and he made awfully good wine. You know, it was before Prohibition, and he sold it. And so then after Dad, every time he'd come vacation, he'd come to see Mama, and married her when she's 17. She was about 15 when she first met him, and took her back to Woodward. And I was born in Woodward then, and my brother was born in Woodward. And then we moved to Shawnee later on, and Dad, he bought an acreage, 10 acres northeast of Shawnee, pretty close to town. And he built a home there, and G.P. Carr, the contractor that had just come there, and had become quite a big contractor, and after years, but he built, the first house he built was our home. It was a 2-story home, and a barn and everything. And the Carr family, their name was Carr, and they bought one of the first cars in Shawnee, and they came out with it, and we went riding in their car, and I was about 7.
What kind of car was it?
7 years old. Oh, you know, I don't know. It was just a car, and it was wonderful. You know, I think I was 7.
Yeah. How'd your grandfather make the run? On horseback, by a wagon, or?
He was in a wagon, a spring wagon, with a team. But I think it was a team of horses that he run in the race.
What did he say about that day, April 22nd?
What did Dad say about it?
Yeah.
Well, he told about the trip coming, you know, to Oklahoma from Wellington, and about seeing deer and seeing wild turkeys and everything was wild, you know, and I don't remember him mentioning much about the Indians on there, if anything, but the excitement of
they had lined all up, you know, ready for the run, and they couldn't run until they shot off this gun, you know. And when he shot off the gun, why, then everybody just went wild. It was just bedlam and staking out their claims. And there was a few Sooners, I think they called them Sooners, that had staked off claims before it happened, but they didn't. And they got some good land. I mean, and Grandpa afterwards sold out and moved to the state of Washington, and then he moved to California. And I never met my grandfather Jarbo, and Papa's mother died when he was 2 years old, and he had a stepmother and half brothers and sisters, and in fact he had 2 sets of twins, twin girls and twin boys, and we'd never met them. Mama had never met them until we went out there when I was 10 years old. We went to California and stayed out there for 3 years and lived out there.
How long did you live in Woodward?
I was past 5. I was almost 6. I was 6 after we moved to Shawnee. We moved
Do you
in
remember anything
September,
about
I think.
Woodward?
Yes, I remember.
What was Woodward like when you lived?
Well, it wasn't a very big town. We had a whole, Papa had bought a whole block in town and built a house on it, and we used the whole block in town. And the reason we sold out, Dad proved up though on a claim north of Woodward, and we had to go out there and live, you know, for I think 6 months or something like that to prove up on it. So he had to go out there and live, and he'd come back in town and then go back and had to get off from the store and live there. And then he rented it out to the people from Kentucky that came out there. And Dad said the Indians were pretty wild in those days, and they'd have Indian stomp dances, and some of them was war dances, and it's pretty dangerous to go out there and watch them. But he said he'd seen them. They'd kill a beef and then eat it raw. And he said he'd see them eating the raw meat and the blood running down their chins, you know. And they were that primitive that they lived like that. And Dad, when he left home at 14. He ran away from home. He didn't like his stepmother. He said he knew that afterwards that she was as good to him as she was to her own children, and was a sweet old thing, but she was a stepmother, and he just didn't get along, I guess. And he was a Catholic, and he served on the altar as an altar boy, and so, but Dad was never a Catholic after he left home. He left home at 14 and went to Woodward. And he racked around quite a bit, and then he wanted to, he served in a saloon. He worked in a saloon when he was 17, and the old ladies in the town thought that he was just ruined, you know, they would ruin him working in the saloon. But Dad never touched a drop while he was there.
What did he do in the saloon?
Huh?
What did he do in the saloon?
Well, he sold whiskey
He did?
in the saloon.
Was that in Woodward?
Yes, in Woodward, uh-huh.
What was the name of the saloon?
Oh, I don't, I don't remember what the name was. But Papa said then he wanted to he attended a business college there, and he also thought he wanted to be a lawyer a while, and he studied under Temple Houston. He was quite a lawyer, and he wore his hair long, and at that time, and Dad studied quite a bit. He had they had a number of law books that we had in the house, our home that burned. Dad loved books, and we had a lot of books.
Did you ever meet Temple Houston?
Huh?
Did you meet Temple Houston?
Well, no, I never met him, because Dad wasn't studying, and he went somewhere else. He moved to Texas, I believe,
or something, and I believe in Texas. And but Dad liked him very much, and he liked Papa, but he moved there, and Dad didn't want to go. Then he had Mother on the string, and so he married then, and then he worked in a store called the York Keys store. Now remember that store because I was a little girl when he was working there.
What kind of
And
store
he had,
was it?
it was in, he was manager of the shoe department. It was a department store. And the old York Key store, I don't suppose it's there now. And I remember the banker, the banker had a little girl just the age of me, and they were real good friends of Mom and Dad's, and I played with Marie Stein. It was Mr. Stein that had the bank there. And then they were quite active in the social life, and they had operas in those days, And we went to the opera, and they took me to the opera when I was 2, and they played Shawnee River, and I got up in my seat and I sang along with the top of my voice and it embarrassed Mom and Dad so much. The people around her said, "Don't stop her." They're afraid that I'd go to cry, and that'd be worse, So I sang, and you couldn't understand many of the words, but I had the tune.
How did you move to Shawnee? Did you go by wagon or by train?
When we moved to Shawnee, oh no, they had trains. Rock Island was there. We came by the Rock Island, but we went to Hot Springs first, and took the baths. Dad was kind of run down from being indoors. He was an outdoor man, really, and he was run down. He'd worked 14 years there before we moved, and so we went. Mama was pregnant with my baby brother. And he thought Mama ought to take the baths too, so he even bathed us kids, those colored women did, and wrapped us in big towels. And Mama was in the shower, and they turned the hot shower on her, and then the cold shower, and she began to scream, And oh, my little brother, he was 4. He just liked to had a fit. He just began to beat that old woman with his hands, because he thought he was hurting. She was hurting Mama.
What bathhouse did you go to?
Oh, honey, I don't know what the bathhouse was. It's just one of those bathhouses there that everybody went to.
What were the baths like?
Well, I just remember they put us in a warm tub, but they had showers and tubs too that they bathed them in. And then they'd have a warm towel, big warm towel, and wrap you in it. And so we were staying at a hotel there in Hot Springs, and I know Mom and Dad one morning told us kids, Papa had bought Mama a handbag made of alligator handbag, and she was real proud of it, and it had a little inside pocketbook inside of it, and he'd given her $35 to buy anything she wanted, and she wanted a pretty comb for her hair, and they were standing out in front of the jewelry store, and Mama was standing with her bag holding it behind her, just looking in the window at these combs. Somebody picked her pocket and picked the little purse out, and when she was going to buy me a doll and Paul, my brother, a teddy bear. And the money was gone, so we didn't get the teddy bear or the doll, either one then. And then Dad, he thought that Mama ought to have some help, and so he went to Colored Town and found a girl to take home with us,
No,
Shawnee,
in
maid.
Shawnee, okay.
And we brought her to Shawnee. Mattie McKay was her name, and she was real sweet with us kids. She's about 18 years old, and Papa promised her mother that when we got through with her, that we would send her back to Hot Springs. and so she stayed several years with us, and we kids just loved her. And she would mix up her sorghum with butter and stir it until it was real yellow looking, you know, and eat on her hot biscuits. She did the cooking, but she didn't know how to cook. Mama taught her how to cook, and Mama taught her how to keep house and everything. And she just loved us kids, and we just loved Maddie. But we think mix up our sorghum, you know, like she would, because we thought it looked good. And she. One day a colored man, he heard that we had a colored gal there, and he come to the door, and Maddie said she said if he comes through that door, she said, I'll hit him with a butcher knife, it sure as a world. And she didn't want a boyfriend, seemingly. However, we went to a circus, and Mama thought that Maddie could take care of us kids at the circus, but she couldn't. She had to sit in the what is they call it? The
Colored section.
Anyway, it was a colored section. So when we got out, why, Maddie wasn't around. And so we started up the street, and we heard somebody just laugh, and it was Maddie. She was with one of those porters, you know, at the circus. Oh, Mother liked to die, you know. Mother told her to come right on over there where we were at, and she went on home with us. And when the neighbors found out that she was going to leave, they wanted to keep her, you know. That Dad had promised her mother he'd send her back, and I don't know what become of them. And while she was living with us, her little sister died in Arkansas, and they she got the word, and of course she was all heartbroken and crying over it. And while she was crying, she said, Miss Jabo said, a little Jessie is just as white as you is now. She thought that
She went to heaven and they made her white.
We lived in Shawnee 6 years and then sold to my uncle and aunt.
What year did you move to Shawnee?
What?
What year did you move to Shawnee?
We moved to Shawnee in 1907.
1907.
That was the year it became a state.
What was Statehood Day like in Shawnee? What did you do on Statehood Day?
What?
What did you do on Statehood Day?
Well, I don't know that what we did. I can't remember. You know, Daddy built a barn first, and then we lived in the side of the barn. It was a barn with red with the white stripes on it, you know, over where the boards went together, the white boards. And so they put a stove in there, and we stayed in there till we finished our house. But they built the barn first. Then Daddy bought a horse that was named Old Coley, and a surrey with fringe all around it, two-seated. It had coal oil lights on each side, you know, and we could drive at night.
Oh, fancy.
And it was wonderful. And then he bought a cow that we named Old Peach, and she just looked like a peach, you know, the color of her, Jersey cow. And we had our own milk, and our house was really a story and a half. We had 2 bedrooms upstairs, 3 bedrooms upstairs, and we had a living room and dining room and kitchen and bath downstairs. And on the porch we had the cistern, so we'd have soft water, you know, to use in the house. And we had it piped in the house. And Dad planted the 10 acres to grapes and cherries and peaches, and he was really a farm boy at heart, and he loved to grow things. And all of his life he loved to grow things. And we just had everything. We grew strawberries and blackberries, and Dad had a nice garden, and he planted onion seed in the garden. And he told us kids, Paul and I, to weed those onions, you know. They give us a little job to do. And, you know, I just thought it looked like we was going to have to do that forever. It was those little onions and the weeds, and I hated it. And I hated the farm ever since. I never got over
Where
nothing
was the
that-
farm? How far from Shawnee?
It was about 2.5 miles from Shawnee proper, from the downtown.
Were you
We
south
went
of
into
Shawnee?
town often.
Were you south of Shawnee?
Northeast.
Northeast.
It was northeast of Shawnee.
Okay.
And you know that house blew down about 3 years ago in a tornado.
For goodness sake.
And the house in Woodward blew away in a tornado. And the house that we lived in California, one of them was moved completely, and they made a business place for it. And the house out in the country, Dad bought 20 acres out in the country in California, and they had a big 2-story ranch house of 8 rooms, and it burned. And the house that we lived in when we was first married, it burned. And Daddy Rooker, we sold Daddy Rooker's house that we lived in. There isn't a house that we ever lived in that I ever lived in that is still there, excepting this one.
Who were, you mentioned your grandparents and the Civil War.
Oh, well, Daddy Rooker was in. Did you take down anything about Daddy Rooker?
I don't think so.
You didn't. Well, he was born in Resaca, Georgia, and when he was 4 years old, his father died, and there was quite a family of them. He was the baby of the family, I think, of 8, and when he was 8 years old, the war was going on, and Sherman was marching through, and his mother had quite a few slaves, and she kept the slaves after her husband died, and they just farmed the place. I don't know how many acres they had, but they had a plantation, and so they had to refugee away from Resaca because of the war, and Sherman was coming through, burning everything in front, behind him anyway, that he marched through. So she buried her silverware and some other valuables under a corner of the fence.
Rail fence.
What are those called?
Rail fence.
Rail fence. And they refugeed, as he said, to North Carolina or South Carolina, one of the Carolinas. And when they came back after the war, everything was burned. Their home was burnt, and everything was burnt. The smokehouse was burnt, and they had to just makeshift. But they burned they leased the dirt underneath the smokehouse for salt. They didn't have salt. They were in dire circumstances. Everybody in the South was just, that had been wealthy and plenty. They had nothing after the war, and it was awful hard. And the men, they had the colored folks to do all the work. They did nothing. And the women, though, they spun their thread and they made their materials, and made the clothes and taught the Negroes, women, how to sew and how to make soap and how to do things. And the women knew how to do the things that they had to do because they worked at it. But the men were kind of like just gentlemen. They just dressed up and had it easy.
Tell them about the one that was gonna, she was taking the slaves and going east with them, and one old man had married a girl out of another bunch, hadn't he?
Well, when Mother Rooker got ready to, Grandmother Rooker got ready to leave, for refuge, when they were refugee, you'll have this all mixed up. She had one of the colored men wasn't going to leave. He had married a girl from another plantation, and he didn't want to leave her. And so Grandma bought her, and it paid $700 and some odd of good United States money, you know, for her, and she took her slaves with her, and so she brought them back, and of course they were free then. But some of them stayed on and helped because they didn't know where to go, they didn't know what they could do, and they stayed on, but they had to pay them something, you know, for staying, and so by law, and so old nigger Jerd, he was 21 years old when Daddy Rooker was born, and his father told Jerd, he said, "You're going to take care of Leroy." That was my Roy's father. They called him Lee years after that, but at that his name was Leroy, and so he said, he's going to be your care, and you're going to see after him. So years afterwards, Daddy Rooker went back in his 70s, and George, you see, was real old, but he was still alive. And so they met and threw their arms around each other. You know, both of them cried when Roy's brother took Daddy Rooker, Roy's father, back to Resaca, Georgia.
Did they get the silverware and stuff they buried?
Yeah, it was still there. They never found it. And Daddy Rooker had a little sister that was scalded to death. In those days, they scoured the floors till they were white, you know, they were pine floors, but they scoured them. They really scoured them. They'd take sand and scour them with sand and then rinse it all off of the floors. And the floors, you could eat off of them. They were so white and nice. And so Daddy Rooker said they were scouring the floor. That's the way he spoke of it, you know, and had a wooden tub in there full of hot water. And the little girl, 3 years old, backed into it and fell in it. And she scalded to death. Of course, they got her out right away, but she was so badly burned that she died.
What did they do after the Civil War?
Well, they just tried to grow something to eat, and got hogs and things like that. And you know, these dead bodies were everywhere, and they hadn't had time to bury all of them, and they finally just become. Well, Daddy Rooker said he'd go over to a neighbor boy's house and go through the pasture, and he said those old skulls, you know, would scare him, you know, as he'd go, and he'd run all the way because he was afraid of them. And he helped, when he was about 16, he helped bury a lot of them. And the bones, you know, were there. And they he said they pick up bones, you know, and maybe they didn't belong to, part of them didn't belong to the boy that they put in the I don't know whether they had the identification that they had in World War II, you know, with those tags around their necks at all. And he said some of them they dug up, they were in a sort of soil that they were just so well preserved that their hair was still parted, and they were still, you could tell who they were, you know, you could have identified them in their uniforms, and they would be buried in a soil that kept them like that. And he helped, he got, how much was it? Was it $1 or something?
To take people and show them where different graves was that he knew where they'd buried some of them. And they'd give him $1 for each
grave.
He'd show them.
Now, were these Union soldiers or Confederate?
They were, well, I imagine
Both.
they were both, don't you imagine? Southern and both too. Because Sherman was leading the northern troops in there. We visited, we went through Georgia and visited a military Is that all right now to
Yes,
talk?
ma'am. Go ahead.
Well, Grandma said she passed this man. She was rushing so to get to him, and she really thought a lot of him. He was awful good to her. She said he treated her like a baby, and never told her any of his business. Well, when she got up the houseway, she said the lady of the house was out on the front porch with the doors locked and wringing her hands and crying, and she was afraid he was in the house. They'd got him in the house and got him at the bedroom, and she said when she got into the bedroom, well, he was sitting on the side of the bed, and said he looked awful white, but she couldn't see any blood. And she said, I said, are you bad hurt? And he said, yes. He said, I'm bad hurt. And he said, I want to tell you all about my business as much as I can before I die. And Grandma sat down there beside of him, and he just put both arms around her and kind of leaned on her, and he tried to tell her about his business. He never told her a thing, and Grandma was just like a baby. She hadn't inquired, you know. And so he told her that he had quite a bit of cattle, told her how he had, and he wanted to dispose of it. And he owed some debts, and so he lived for 2 hours and died. And after he died, Grandma said, well, I don't see any blood. And she said, let me see where you're shot. And he said, oh, no. He said, but you can go out and look at the back end of the spring wagon. It just blew a great big hole in it as they went through it. And so she said after he died, well, then the blood began to go all over the floor. And Grandma had to scrub that up. She had to clean up. This woman was just scared to death. She didn't ever help her do a thing about it.
Where did that happen?
My grandmother was so gritty.
Where did that happen?
It happened here in Oklahoma.
Where at? Do you remember?
Well, it must have been down close to Wanette.
Do they live down there?
Because I thought it was down by Paul's Valley, but my Aunt Toots came to visit afterwards, and she told me that it was after Grandmother died, that it was Wanette. And so she said that after, sometime down there close to Hartshorn, it was close to where they settled when they came here. And because her husband, this Darling, was a real good friend of her father and mother, or stepmother. And so they knew him well, and that's how she got, well, he had dangled her on his knee and held her on his lap when she was a baby, and then married her at 17, he was 65. So she said that after he died, why she said the people just stole things blind. Said she knew he didn't owe things, but she had no proof of it. And they just come and took the cattle, they took everything nearly she had. And so Grandma had to, she had to do something to support her family. She stayed there, though must have stayed there until after the baby was born, because she said that after he died, he was buried on the place, under a big oak tree that was near the house. And she said a panther would get in that tree almost every night and scream and screech. It would scare her to death, but she never saw him until later. She said her sister had came to visit her with the two children, just spend the day. They lived within miles of each other. And everybody walked in those days anyway, And she said the children run on ahead, and they come back saying there was a panther laying across the road. And she said it measured 9 feet. Somebody had killed it and just stretched it across the road. So she said, I don't know whether that was a panther or not, but I never heard it anymore. Mm-hmm. But they screamed just like a woman in pain, just making awful noise. And there was quite a few panthers in Oklahoma at that time. So then she started in the started a boarding house.
What year was this?
It was it was in the 1800s, because my mother was born in 1884, and this was long before my mother was born. And because she married, she started a boarding house, and you know her children were big enough to go to school. Some of them, 2 or 3 of them, and you know there was a young boy stopped in the town and was hired as a teacher, and his name was I wrote it down because I was afraid I'd forget it. His name was Gordon Lilly.
Is this?
Gordon Lilly.
Lilly.
And he was
Gordon
Pioneer
Lilly.
Pawnee Bill.
Yeah, that's on
And
the,
so he became Pawnee Bill after that, but he was the teacher that was teaching the children. He'd come from somewhere, some other
Was this
state.
in Wanette?
Huh?
Was this in Wanette?
Well, it was around in there somewhere. I don't know. You know, some of the towns are not there anymore. It might have been some other place, but Aunt Ruth said it was at Wanette when she had this boarding house, and so Grandma, she was a good cook, and while she was she kept her meat in a barrel. They'd butcher, you know, and salt it down in a barrel, and she'd keep it in a barrel. And the barrel was getting kind of empty, and she leaned over it and bruised her breast. And it rose, and oh, it got great, big, huge, and she suffered terrible. And the doctor lanced it 9 times before it got well. And she said that when the 9th time, she said, "Can't you give me something that will ease the pain, that I won't be so painful?" He said, "Yes." He said, "There's a new thing called ether that they give." And so he poured it out in a spoon and gave Grandma, and Grandma said when she swallowed it, she lost her breath and she thought she was going to die. And she said that he lanced it while she was struggling for breath. He lanced it, and he lanced it right through the nipple. And so he said, "You'll never be able to nurse another baby." But that was before my mother was born. So Mama nursed her back out. But Grandma said she says, "I've told several doctors about him giving me that ether, and they wouldn't believe it. You know, it was supposed to be put on something, but he didn't know how to use it." And they said, "Well, I think it was kill you." She said, "Well, it almost did." She said, but that's how ignorant that these doctors, a lot of them didn't know anything at all. My my grandfather, it's a story all around. My grandfather was on the stage. He went to from Canada. He was born in Canada, and he went to Canada. His father and sister and brother went out there early when I guess maybe the gold rush was on or something. Anyway, they heard that California was a wonderful place, and people were going in covered wagons, just whole droves of them, to California. And so he lived with his sister while his father went out there, and he was quite young when his mother was dead. And so he stayed with a married sister in Canada. And they were making up a wagon train up there, and he was 12 years old at that time, and he didn't like his brother-in-law, and he just decided he would go to where his father was in California, near Sacramento. And so he went down where they was making up the wagon train and asked if he could go along. And there was no Frenchman with 2 kids. Was a widower. He said yes, he could go along with him and help him with they were younger than, the children were younger than Grandpa. And so they let him go with them. But in the trip, it took a long days, you know, about 3 months or 4 to get to California. And he traveled with first one and then another, you know. But one night, while he was with his Frenchman, why, the Frenchman would sit up till midnight. I mean, he would, sit up till midnight, and then he'd have Grandpa sit up the rest of the night. He'd wake him up and to watch the mules. They tethered them out with a rope around their neck and staked them out, and they had to keep watch because of the Indians and animals too. And so Grandma said it was his time to watch, and he when he tied the knot, he tied the slip knot around the neck and didn't realize what he had done. And as the mule ate, you know, it got tighter and tighter till finally it choked him, and he fell, and he died, choked to death. And Grandpa was afraid that the old Frenchman would kill him if he knew that what happened. And so Grandpa said when he found it out, he probably went to sleep while he was supposed to be watching the mule. And he said when he tried to get the rope untied, his neck had swollen, and he just had a time getting it untied to retie it, you know. And the old Frenchman thought the snake had bit the mule, what had killed him. And so Grandma then kind of fell out with the old mule, and man, he didn't trust him too much, and so then he stayed with others till he got to Sacramento. And when they got to Sacramento, why, everybody was tired and dirty, and their clothes was pretty well worn out, and they bought new clothes and then discarded them and piled them up there at the edge of town wherever they were allowed to park their wagons. And Grandpa said that he didn't have any money to buy new clothes, so he went and looked over the pile, and he got him a hat, and he got him a Bowie knife that someone had discarded, and he stuck it in his belt. And he didn't know. He might have known the direction that his grandfather lived, but he didn't know how far or anything it was. He started down the road, and he said that he came to a tomato patch that was just full of tomatoes, and he was hungry, you know, and so he went in and he ate his fill of tomatoes, and then he went on further, and he came to a watermelon patch, and he said the house set up on the hill from the watermelon patch that was near the road. And he said he went in there and cut him a watermelon and ate what he wanted, and then he said he was just slashing them, you know, with a knife. It was fun to see them pop open, you know. And he said, come to find out, the lady of the house was his sister and his father. And she said, Dad, there's somebody down there just slashing your watermelons. And so the old man went down there. Well, he didn't recognize Grandpa because he hadn't seen him for several years. And so, but my grandfather recognized his father. And he said, well, Dad, don't you know me? I'm Johnny. And the old man was just happy to see him, you know, and hugged him. And then he took him into town and bought him new clothes and give him a $5 gold piece. And my grandfather said he thought that he was really somebody when he got there, and he loved it there. And when he grew up, why, some way he got on the stage, and he was known as Billy Emerson, a comedian. And I read after I married, I took the ladies, the Woman's Home Companion, I believe it was in, and I read in there Lillian Russell's, you know, great actress Lillian Russell.
Yes.
The history of her, a biography or something, and she spoke of Billy Emerson in this, and he knew Lillian Russell. I've heard him speak of her, and he knew he could quote Shakespeare. My grandfather was an avid reader, and he loved Shakespeare, and he loved the plays, and he could quote it, like it says, it isn't as round as a cup or as deep as a well, but it'll do. That was one of the things he would say, he'd say, well, what do you think about that? Well, he'd say, well, it's neither as round as a cup or as deep as a well, but it'll do. And so many of the sayings. And I remember he would say, now I don't know where it is in Shakespeare, although I've read most of the Shakespeare plays, but it's been a long time ago. It says, the fisherman's wife had chestnuts in her lap, and munched and munched and munched. Gimme, quoth I. Now, right thee, wench, the rump-fed runyon cried.
That's Midsummer Night's Dream, and that's Puck.
Have you read that?
Yes, yes.
I believe we're gonna have to shoot her to stop her, don't you?
No, go right ahead.
I know several other things, but my grandfather played in that, and he fell in love with a girl, and she died, and it tore him up so bad that he just quit everything, and went to the gold mines, and there was a lot of went to state of Washington and different places where there was mining, and he was just kind of a drifter. After that, he just lost all desire to live and so he drifted into Oklahoma. The Oklahoma was kind of on everybody's lips. It was a new country, and it was an Indian country, and it was the Indian nation, and so they came to, and he happened to come to Grandma's boarding house, and stayed there and worked. I don't know what, he was a carpenter too by trade. He could do anything, Grandpa could. And so, now Charles Mooney writes, I wrote a history of, and in that he speaks of my grandfather. No, it's my grandfather, and also speaks of this Louis Darling. And so, and there might be more. I have the book over there in the bookcase. And so Grandpa, he felt so sorry for Grandma with those children and working so hard, and his heart he just sympathized with her. He had so much to do, and she was little, too, but she was fiery. And so finally he asked her to marry him, and she married my grandfather Smith. That was the third time. And so then they moved but Grandma had this 160 acres, of Indian land that she had.
See, she
had
got
acquired
qualified for
down
Indian and
near
brought
Wanette.
160 acres up nearby.
Well, she didn't trade it for Choctaw until they came back from Missouri. They went to Missouri and worked in the mines, and then I had two uncles that was big enough, half uncles, that were big enough to work in the mines in Missouri. And it was at St. Joseph, where my mother was.
What kind of mines were they?
Born, huh?
What kind of mines were they?
Coal mines.
What'd your grandfather do in the mines?
I guess he worked in the mines with the boys. Done the same thing. I don't know. Just mine gold. The coal. And they lived at St. Joseph for several years. And my oldest uncle, half uncle, Darling, Uncle Ford Darling, they went to come back to Oklahoma and decided that they'd just get this 160 acres and live on it. And so this was before statehood, long before statehood. So Grandma and her family started to come back, and Uncle Ford had fallen in love with a 17-year-old girl in St. Joe, and so he married her. Grandma gave her consent, and he married her and brought her to Oklahoma with him. And Grandma traded her place for 160 at Choctaw, near Choctaw. And I think Mama was 11 years old when they came to Oklahoma, and she had 4 sisters. Grandpa had 4 daughters by Grandma, and Grandpa Smith, and he was my grandfather, and he they came in there. There was nothing on the place, you know, at all, and they built caves. What do they call it? What they call it?
Dugouts, you mean?
Huh?
Dugouts, you mean?
Dugouts, yeah. They built dugouts and they lined them with white cloth. Cloth was cheap, and they lined them with white cloth and overhead, and they have one for a kitchen and one for bedrooms, and maybe they'd have several, you know, and maybe they'd eat in the kitchen. They'd have a table down there where they could eat in the kitchen, and they'd have bedrooms in 2 beds, maybe in a. I never saw them, and until Grandpa could get the lumber and build a house. And some of the then I think Uncle Ford's first baby was born in a dugout, and Grandma got to where she went all over the country, you know, as a midwife. Delivering babies, and she was just like a nurse. She was.
What part of
could just do
Oklahoma did they
anything.
come to?
Huh?
What part of Oklahoma did they come to?
Well, they came to Choctaw, where
Choctaw,
they
okay.
lived then in the dugouts. They were Choctaw, and then they built a 2-story house later on. But they put in cotton and corn and acquired hogs, and Grandma had geese and turkeys and guineas and all kind of, and they had a big peach orchard they'd put out, and they had everything almost self-sustaining, you know, where they lived.
You said she had 160 somewhere over here. Was it close to Wanette? Is that where you were talking about?
That's where
she-
where she, I think, is around one
Well,
end
did
where
they
she had
trade
all
that
the.
for this up
And they-
She traded the 160 acres for this 160 at Choctaw.
I
Traded,
see.
just traded, you
I
know.
see. I see. Okay. Now I'm straight. I got you.
Yeah. And whenever they paid the Potawatomis off, why, she got paid too, you know, because of her. And she, some of them wanted her to, wanted Grandpa to put Mama and Dad and Mama and her 3 sisters on the head roll, you know, down at the Indian Agency, because through Grandma's right, but Grandma didn't think that was right, and he wouldn't do it. He didn't think that they were entitled to it, but they could have, because of Grandma's right, they could have had a right too, but they didn't do that. And so Grandma lived there until she died, and she died at 81 years old, and she died of pneumonia. She didn't die. She was pretty healthy. She smoked a pipe in her old days. She said she had
I remember
awfully
her.
bad headaches, neuralgia they called it. And Grandpa told her, she said Grandpa caused her to smoke. He said he smoked, and he said, you smoke, Mama. He said, and I think that it'll help your head. And she said it did. So the kids would fuss at her, you know, for smoking, and she'd give it up. And then she'd get so cranky we couldn't stand her. They'd tell her to go back and to go to smoking.
Well, you better wind
She
up.
was-
My grandmother had a hard life, but she and Grandpa had loved each other, and I think she loved Grandpa Smith more than any of them. He was about 35 though, and she was 27 or 8 when she married him. She wasn't as old as he was. All of them was old that she married.
Did you say that she was Indian,
Huh?
or did you say that she had Indian blood, or did she got her
No,
head right
she had
through?
no Indian blood, and neither did her husband. Mr. Darling didn't, but he
But
married
he-
this Indian woman, you
Okay,
see,
okay.
and he was adopted into the tribe.
And that's where that property came from. That's what I understood. I wanted to be sure I was clear on that it came through Mr. Darling's Indian wife and through,
Yes.
and then when she
Yes.
married Mr. Darling, then it went to her.
She-
Okay,
you
that's
see,
what I want to know.
She had his, by her marrying Mr. Darling, well then she became just like an Indian, but she wasn't. No, she was French.
Because he was
really
on
French.
the roll and was treated as an Indian. Therefore,
There was
she
quite
had
a
the
lot
same.
of that done,
Yeah.
you know, that
Yes.
they
Into the
adopted,
tribe.
especially if a man married in the Indian tribe. That, now his wife had died though, this old man, Darling's wife had died. And Grandma had, the children were all just nice to Grandma as could be. But Grandma had a brother in Kansas that had, while they were in I don't know whether they moved to Kansas or not, but anyway, it was during a blizzard that he had been off working somewhere else, and he came by Grandma's and stayed overnight. And the next day it was still bad, but he wanted to go and get home to his wife and family. And he had bought his wife what they called a pattern. It was material that for a dress, about eight yards. I mean, it took a lot of material in those days. And so he got within a half a mile of his home, and he froze to death. And he wasn't found until the next day or two. And, you know, she didn't know he was coming home, and so Grandma said that she got worried about him. You know, I don't know how they. I said they found him the next day. I don't know when they found him, but I know Grandma got worried about him so bad, and some way they found out that he hadn't got home and he'd started home, and so they looked for him and found his body. And he had wrapped that wool material all around his neck and face. And he was dressed warmly, but it was so bitter cold, and he just froze to death. And his name was Luke, too.
Where did you go to school?
Huh?
Where did you go to school?
Oh, I went to school all over the country. I went to school in Shawnee, and I went to school in California, and I went to school in New Orleans. And
Where'd you go to school in Shawnee?
I went to school at Equity. I can think it's called the Grove School now. It's northeast of Shawnee.
Who's your teacher?
Was Mr. Munson. Did you ever know the Munsons? He taught there for years. Mr. Munson, his daughter
Yeah,
taught
she's
there
not
too.
Near old enough to remember.
No, I don't believe I do right at this point. But
No, it's too long ago,
No,
honey.
it's
That was
quite a long
long
time
before
ago.
you
Your
were
folks
born.
live in Shawnee?
yes, they do.
What do they live there now?
Yes,
What's their name?
their name's Mitchner.
Mitchner.
What?
Leroy Mitchner.
What is your name?
Mitchner?
Mitchner. I've heard that name.
Mincer.
Mitchner.
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 M-I-S-H.
M-I-C-H.
M-I-C-H-N-E-R.
E-N-E-R.
Well, how long have you lived there?
Oh, I've lived there all my life.
You was born there too, were you?
Yes, yes, yes.
Well, we lived up north town. There was some people by the name of Baldwins, and there's some people by the name of Bradleys, and some people by the name of Hunters and McLaughlins. All lived out there. But that's been so long ago, honey, that you wouldn't. They've been, part of them's dead and gone.
Where'd you go to
All of
school
them.
in New Orleans?
Huh?
Where did you go to school in New Orleans?
I went to school right in New Orleans. They had a,
You know, there's a little schoolhouse right on the.
there's no
road as
school
you
there
go
now.
along.
See,
They
they've
got
a
horses and things in there now, I think.
What was the name of the school?
It's just New Orleans School. It wasn't a high school.
Well,
I never got any. We went to a grand school in California. We went to the teachers training school. There was a new teachers college that had gone in at our town, and while they would take 6 boys and 6 girls from each class, and we were chosen because we all played the violin and we could we was talented, and we got to go to the teachers training school, and we had dancing, we had voice, and we had manual training, and we had sewing, and we had so many things that the other kids in the town didn't have. And then we come back here to, Dad had 40 acres that he'd wanted before he ever married my mother. 40 raw acres of just blackjacks. And we moved on that and had to rub those blackjacks out. I didn't, but we had to hire it done. And Dad built a house and barn and everything, and he went to planting trees and strawberries and everything. He worked in the Bazaar store in Arcata, in California. And we went to the first year went to a school called Hill, and we walked 3 miles to the school. And we had a dipper and a water bucket and a dipper in it and a pan to wash your hands in, and they froze up in the wintertime, and it was miserable. And our teacher, he had all the 8th grade, from first grade to 8th grade, and he was a young man, and he was in love with a girl and married her secretly while he was teaching, and he never even gave us a grade card and I was in the 7th grade. And so then I went to New Orleans the next year in the 8th grade.
She was singing around different schoolhouses and things, and no boy told me about her, said, she said, God darn, he said, that's what the words he said, prettiest girl I ever seen. And so I checked on her, and I guess I thought so.
Mother sewed beautifully, and she made me pretty clothes, and people just thought we was rich, because I always looked nice, and I had pretty hair. So then I went to New Orleans and graduated had to go to Oklahoma City to graduate from the 8th grade.
She cut her hair off, so we've both been cheated.
That's how I met Roy, this teacher's and his wife's wedding dance, and I met Roy. I was 14, and he was, and I finished the 8th grade, and he'd take a high school course, which I did. I took ancient history and algebra and Latin and I forget what, the English. And so he thought that if I'd go to school in the summer to Edmond, that I could get credit for it. And I wanted to go so bad. I loved school, and I wanted to go on to school. But Roy had come on the scene then. He'd come back from the Army, and he sure didn't want me going to school. And the folks were so crazy about Roy, they didn't want me to go to school either. They afraid of busting me up with Roy. And so I married instead. And I wanted to start in Dale after I married, and they had high school down there. And the wagon, it was a wagon team that called the kids, and I could have gone every day, but Roy just blew his top, and I mentioned it, didn't want me going to school.
As a little girl, what kind of chores did you have to do?
Chores?
Mm-hmm.
When I was married, you mean, or before?
Before you were married.
I never milked a cow, I never fed a chicken, I never done anything but just housework. always helped Mama and Papa. When I was 14, Papa made me get up and get breakfast each morning. He said Mother got breakfast for me for a long time, and I could get up and get breakfast. So Mama loved to sleep in, so she slept in, and I got breakfast. So I knew how to cook, but I didn't. Mama never let me do a washing before I married at all. I'd clean up the house and get dinner while she washed. And so when I married, I dinged everything I had, you know, because I didn't know how, and rubbed blisters on my fingers and rubbing on a rub board.
We
We're
built this
so
house,
primitive.
lived in it. How long
Makes
we
me
lived
mad
in
yet.
this house before we got electric lights?
27 years before we got electricity.
See, this
after
house
we
is
married.
54
So you
years
know,
old.
you couldn't have any conveniences whatsoever. Roy did
And
give
it
me a
went through
Maytag
that
washer that had a
Cyclone, you know,
gasoline motor in it, you know.
Oh.
And I had a gasoline iron, and that's just we did. Lights, our kids, the older kids too, studied and finished high school by lamplight,
Coal oil that.
but all of them went to college.
Did you do any work for the war effort in World War One?
Yes, I did a little while and got a certificate. I think I still have the certificate.
What'd you do?
Oh, I just tried to get the recruits girls to join the war. You know, they needed girls for. I talked to several girls. One went, but I think she was the only one that went that I knew of that joined up.
Mm-hmm. You do any knitting or sewing or anything?
Oh, I gave a whole batch of records. And I kind of wish I had them now. We had the records for the boys for the OSO or where
USO.
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 Records for the boys.
Mm-hmm.
Had lots of pretty pieces in it. And then no, I never knitted. I couldn't knit. And I was pretty busy with my family too, and the farm and everything. We had lots to do. I made my own soap, most of it.
How do you make soap?
Huh?
How do you make soap?
Well, the way I made it, if I remember right, I used 2 gallons of water and a can of lye and a gallon of cracklings. We butchered hogs, you know, and then cooked the lard down and had these cracklings. And then you used a gallon of cracklings and sometimes I added a little turpentine to the soap. And I made the soap with just grease, and you just make that up cold. So it makes it awful nice.
What does turpentine do?
I've got some soap down in the basement now that I made about 10 years ago. And
What does the turpentine do for the soap?
well, it just cut that smell of the lye.
Mm-hmm.
Lye soap doesn't smell good. You can add ammonia, and you can add there's sarsaparilla you could add to it to make it smell a little bit better.
Did you? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, that's all I was going to say. You stir this, and let it boil until it's about as thick as honey. When it drops like it's thick as honey, well, then you pull the fire away and let it harden right in the pot. You make it in a big iron pot. And then when it's cold, then you cut it. And there's usually some soft soap underneath it that's awful strong, and they use that soft soap on overalls or something like that you're washing. But then cut it out in bars, and use it. Oh, I used quite a bit. I tried everybody's recipe, though, before I got a recipe that I liked. And then we hung our clothes out on the clothesline and washed on a rub board and boiled our clothes in a big iron pot. It's a mess.
When are you going to
Look
wind up?
back, I wouldn't want to live over those days.
You make head cheese?
Hmm?
Did you make head cheese?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I've canned chili and hot tamales and
How do you make
and
how do you
Made
make head
hominy.
cheese?
hot tamales.
No, how do you make head cheese?
Well, you just cook the head. Roy would take off all the fat off of the head. You know, the bones.
Dig the
There's
eyes
4
out,
bones
you
there,
know, and then
The-
boil the,
and
Boil
knock the teeth out, and
yeah,
gouge the eyes out. You don't have that
boil
part.
that. You
And
know,
the
an eye
ears,
is the toughest part
and you
of,
just have you clean that all out
good.
good, and then you just have the
You
4
go to
bones that
gouge
have
them
meat
out
on it.
by-
But there's a little gristle in there too that makes the head cheese stick together. Then I boil that meat, and then when it got real cooked real done, why put the seasoning in it, and I usually put a little vinegar and a little sage and a little garlic and a little spices, maybe use a little cloves in it, and then press it into a bowl or a pan, a square pan or something. If there's quite a bit of it, why put it in a loaf pan and let it harden, and then you just slice it off, and it's good.
Yeah.
It's good if it's not too fat. I don't like any fat hardly at all in it. I didn't like it, but it's and I didn't grind it. Some people will grind the meat afterwards, but I just press the meat in. It's cooked all to pieces, you know, and use a little broth. I pickle the pig's feet. I pickle the ears. They're just the fluffy part of the ears. You boil them and you scrape them, you know, they're just white as they can be, and then boil them and then pickle them. Well, it's just the fluffy part you don't get down in the ear part. Yeah, they're pretty good. And the pickled pig's feet, I pickled a whole gallon. I made kraut.
Sure. Pickled pig's feet, yeah.
Peace quilts
That's the reason why
quilted.
people
Lots of
existed
quilts.
them days.
My mother
They
never
started
quilted a quilt in her
like
life, but I did. I did a lot of things my mother never had to do.
They started farming, got an old horse that you could hardly walk, and one of them hauled the plow. My grandmother and her
My grandfather
son
went
and
blind
my dad.
before he died. He
Well,
had
they farmed,
cataracts in his
started on
eyes,
that
and
place
an old
and
fella,
everything
a
was
doctor,
burned
come
off
through
of
the
it.
country, you know, eye doctored, and he said he could cure his eyes, you know, and he put something in his eyes that really blinded him. And so he never did get used to it. He couldn't get, they moved into another house, and, you know, he couldn't get used to that house at all, and they had to be led around. And he loved, grandmother read to him so much because he loved to know what was going on in the world. And the World War I had just, well, it started in Germany, but we hadn't got into it yet. And Grandpa knew that felt sure that we was going to get into it. And he and Grandma was sitting out in the yard that summer evening and talking about the war. Grandma had read to him about it, and they were discussing it. And Grandpa went in and went to bed. They smoked before they go to bed. And Grandpa got up and got his pipe in the middle of the night, and he just felt awful bad at his heart. And Grandma got up and he asked her to fan him, and she said there wasn't anything to fan him with but his hat. He wore a big black hat. She began to fan him with a hat, and he said, "Oh Lord, make it easy." And that was all. He was just gone. He was about 70 some odd years old at that time.
Find a place to quit.
Okay, that's
Well, you know, it's fun for me to live it over. Kind of do this.
what kind of notes did you make?
Huh?
What kind of notes did you make?
Oh, I wrote the notes about a story about my grandfather. I thought that
grandmother, I thought that I might send it in to Reader's Digest. You know, they paid
Sure.
$300 for a story that's
Sure thing.
original, and I thought I'd get someone to type it, and then I'd send it off. You had to have it typewritten, you know, and I don't type and didn't have
Well, I'll
anyone
be
to
happy to type it
Would
for you,
ya?
Miss Sure Thing. We have to come back and bring you the
Yeah, we have to bring the other picture back.
yeah, and get those other pictures identified when we get our copies
Yeah.
of them. And
Well, I'm not gonna
Well,
worry
this is-
about that picture because I just put it up on the shelf and nobody sees it.
So
The old timers nearly that was in it is gone. Just
that's
me.
true.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
Oh, I was gonna.
Town, he got
Let me read
about
this over to
halfway
you
down,
right
he
quickly.
couldn't think of his own name. He forgot who he was.
This, this is a true story of my grandmother, Esther Smith. It told me when I was a little girl. My grandmother was a pioneer woman, 5 foot tall, brown eyes and curly hair, and of French descent. She had so much courage and stamina. She married when 13 years old, her first baby of 14 years old, but that isn't my story. She and my grandfather, John Smith, lived on a farm in Oklahoma in the early days, long before statehood. The neighbors lived several miles apart at this time, and she had 3 children, a girl 10 and 2 little boys younger. My grandfather left on a business trip to Missouri and left I guess his family alone
Yeah.
at home. And I intend to copy this before I send it in. And before I had it typed off, and it would be gone for about 10 days. While in Missouri, he had bought a team of mules and a wagon and hired a man to drive them to his home in Oklahoma. Before leaving home, my grandfather butchered a hog for their winter meat supply. It was late in the fall, and at butchering time, the meat was salted down except the backbone, ribs, and liver, and hogshead, which had to be eaten first. When the man with the team arrived, it was just dark, and as he drove into the yard, he hollered, "Hello." And Grandma came. Well, I haven't read this over since I scribbled it off. Came to the door, and he told her he'd brought the team, and where should he stable the mules, and his horse that he'd brought along for his return to his home. Also, he asked if he could spend the night and have a bite to eat, and my grandmother said, of course, and lit the lantern and told the little boys to show him where to put the mules and where to find feed for the mules and his house and his
Horse. Is that
horse, Horse, yeah, I can't read my own writing, and the barn. And after a while, she prepared the evening meal. After she'd prepared the evening meal, one of the little boys returned to the house, and he said, "Mama, that man's a black man." That frightened my grandmother, and not having a gun, she sent the little boy to the woodpile to get the axe, in case she needed to protect herself and the children. She had no phone in those days and felt so helpless. And when this black man came in for supper was ready, and he ate a huge meal of roast ribs and backbone, for he was so hungry. Grandmother fixed a pallet for him on the floor in the corner of the kitchen, which was also the dining room. He seemed very agreeable and thankful that she would put up with him for the night, so Grandmother bid him good night, and she and the children retired in the bedroom and shut the door, and she heard Mr. Man go outside, and then she pushed the dresser against the door, as there was no latch on the door, and she put the boys to bed, and they soon were asleep, but she stayed dressed and wide awake. Mary, her 10-year-old daughter, said, "Mama,
I'll stay up. So too. So they sat on the side of the bed listening, and they heard his shoes hit the floor and knew he was retiring. Then the vigil, I spelled wrong, began. Little Mary got awfully sleepy and began to doze, but not my grandmother. About midnight, my grandmother heard Mr. Man and as she, let's see, she, but, well, what, have I left some of it out? Lost some of it? It was, oh, I guess I recopied this and I misplaced some of it. Anyway, Grandma heard him up, and he was, pretty soon, she got over close to the door with the axe, and so if he pushed through, that she could hit him with the axe. And he, pretty soon she heard him vomiting. He was so sick. He was up prowling around because he was so sick, And so the next morning, Grandma said she knew, well, then he didn't mean any harm. He was just too sick, and she went on to bed. But she said the next morning when she got up, well, he began to make all kind of excuses, about what had happened. He said, I came here and you're knocking on your door and seeing if you had anything to give me. He said, I was so sick. And she said, well, it's just well as you didn't, because I didn't have anything. And so only she had the axe was all she said.
This'll fix you right up.
And so he said, I'll clean up this mess. And Grandma said, no. She said, I'll clean it up. And he said, well, I want to leave early because I wanted to get started to get back to Missouri, where he came from. So Grandma said she fixed him a lunch. He wouldn't eat any breakfast, but she fixed him a lunch to take with him. And he went on, and it was all right, it turned out all right, but she was really scared, she said, because they wasn't used to colored people at all here, it was unusual.
They didn't accept
colored people
colored
around
folks
at all.
them days.
Oh, yeah, wow.
Well, I thought I had it all here. I don't.
Well,
put the way in the
we're going to have to come back because we've still got some pictures, some of Mr. Rooker's pictures that we're having the copies developed.
Well,
and
you know
need to
where
have
we
him
live
identify.
now.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can find you now.
My name's on this
And you get it
mailbox out
ready,
here.
and when I
You
come
didn't
back,
notice
I'll be
that?
Well, no, we
I'd
didn't
be
come
more
down
than
this
happy to
road.
type
We
it up
went
for
on
you.
straight down
Oh,
McLeod
yeah.
Road.
And how did you get
Oh,
back around?
I did just
So we
got
backtracked.
here.
Came back.
She got up
Oh,
and
did
got
you come,
the axe
come
and
back to
stood by
this
the door.
corner over
Yeah.
here?
Her
and then
heart
come back
pounding and
in?
determined
Well,
to
how far
bash
did
his
you
head
get
in
down
if
that
he
way?
pushed the
Oh,
bedroom
we went
door
down,
open.
back, east,
She
I
heard
don't
him
know.
getting
A
out
couple
and
of
How
miles or
far
so.
you went?
welcome sound. He
Well,
was
I said
retching
just
and
come to
vomiting.
the first
Oh,
corner
he was
south
so
of
sick,
that.
too much rich
Did
meat.
you stop up there
Grandma
and call from up
knew-
there?
Mm-hmm.
Knew then
Well,
that they were
couldn't they
safe,
tell
and she
you, or
realized
did you
early
ask?
next
I didn't
morning
ask.
he began to apologize
you
for
got
the
the
mess
phone,
he'd made
yeah.
in the kitchen, and she said she'd cleaned it up. And my grandmother told him no, she'd tend to that, and he didn't want any breakfast, and I want to get an early start for home. He thanked her for the hospitality. He didn't know or dreamed that my little grandmother had stood behind the door with an axe ready to bash him in if necessary.
I'll just be happy to type that off for
if you
you.
can puzzle it out,
I
honey, why-
certainly can. There's no of any trouble.